Hello, folks, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. Well, welcome back to another episode of Heavy Hands. This is the start of the show. Don't check your podcast app. You've not accidentally skipped forward to the second part. You wouldn't want to do that this week in particular, because this week we will be talking about UFC 242, and up front, the main event of UFC 242. Really the reason the card exists, the reason you have any desire to watch it. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Dustin Poirier. I'm Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is my co-host, Phil McKenzie. And we are going to talk about that fight in addition to a couple others from the UFC 242 undercard. Of course, the co-main event, Edson Barboza versus Paul Felder. Very exciting lightweight rematch there. We'll see if Felder has grown to the extent that he can, not just get out kickboxed at range by Edson Barboza. There's a couple other interesting fights on the main card. Islam Makhachev versus Davi Hamosh. Maribek Taisimov. Feels like a while since we've seen him. Should be a very exciting fight he has with Carlos Diego Ferreira. Curtis Blades is making his comeback against Shamil Abdurakhimov. We're going to talk about as much of that stuff as we can. But we also want to try to squeeze in a little recap of last week's totally underwhelming on paper UFC Shenzhen card, especially its main event and its co-main event, both very surprising and impressive in their own ways. But first, Phil, Khabib versus Poirier. Are you excited for this fight?
I am very excited for this fight. I mean, and how could you not be?
Yeah.
This is, Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's been broadly completely unstoppable in the UFC, and Dustin Poirier, who has to be one of the most pleasant, impressive surprises that we've seen in recent memory in the UFC. Going from being a decent, dangerous action fighter to being one of the very best technical strikers in the UFC, and someone who has racked up one of the most impressive short runs in MMA history. Like, in terms of the level of competition and the quality of the fights, you genuinely don't get much better than Dustin Poirier's recent run, which is, Max Holloway, Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, and Anthony Pettis.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's about as good as you could conceivably get.
I didn't get this feeling with Cormier Miocic, Like, that was a big fight. That was a good fight. One that I was very happy to see rematched. A lot of questions going into it. But it does feel like a while since I've had this kind of feeling about a fight. Where for the past 2 weeks, I have just sort of, my brain will be wandering, and then a flickering thought of Khabib and Poirier are fighting will pass through my head, and I will become fascinated to know what happens. Khabib is the unsolvable problem so far, and Dustin Poirier, as you said, maybe like most improved is often a sort of backhanded compliment, but Dustin Poirier was a good fighter before. He's a fucking great fighter now. And his last 3 performances have been, the Pettis fight counts too. Pettis is a little more passive than any of those other guys, but his last 3 performances have been incredible, not just in terms of action, like you said, but also just his execution, his preparation for those fights, and 3 very different opponents against whom Dustin Poirier really made the exact right calls, made the right decisions in 3 very difficult and dangerous fights. And that's a quality I think that's going to be really important against Khabib, is just the ability to stay calm and make the right decisions. Some people also seem to have the feeling that Poirier may be the most dangerous matchup for Khabib ever, the most dangerous opponent, the most likely to beat him that Khabib has ever faced. Do you think there's some merit to that idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Feels like it.
I mean, so this is the strange thing about Khabib, is that he has an incredible resume. 27-0. He's been in the UFC since 2012, and he's gone undefeated since, with the one sole asterisk being that decision win over Gleison Tebow. But he hasn't fought a massive diversity of different fighters. Like, the people that he's tended to go up against have... I don't want to necessarily say that, that they're of a type, because they aren't. Because there isn't really much of a commonality between, say, Pat Healy and Michael Johnson. But you don't get the impression that he's had to go through the competitive wood chipper in the same way that, say, guys like Poirier and Ferguson have had to.
Yeah, Ferguson's resume is insane compared to Khabib's.
Yeah, so everyone that he's fought has generally tended to be to have some kind of exploitable flaw for his style. You know, Conor McGregor is obviously, as we mentioned before the show, before the fight, to some degree of controversy. He's not a phenomenal athlete.
Not in the way Khabib is. People were upset about that. People were like, Khabib's not a great athlete. And then he dropped Conor McGregor with the fastest left hand you've ever seen from someone who still strikes like an amateur boxer. And you're like, oh yeah. He actually gets away with breaking a lot of rules all the time. Yeah.
Quintus kind of slow. Edson Barboza and Michael Johnson don't really need explanations. And then you basically, his best win for my money is still Rafael dos Anjos. Again, might be a little bit of a controversial take, given that Conor McGregor is more famous and perhaps has achieved greater heights, double champ and all that kind of thing. But I would consider RDA to be a more challenging win.
I would agree. But that being said, RDA also. He let Khabib pressure him, and in that kind of matchup, he kind of also plays right into Khabib's hands. Dustin Poirier is the reason it feels like he's this uniquely dangerous matchup is he combines a lot of the sort of problem areas that Khabib has been able to easily work around in the past into one fighter. He's got the footwork that McGregor had some success with against him in the third round. He can cut those angles. In fact, I'd say he maybe doesn't have those quick angle changes quite as good as McGregor, but more consistent footwork than McGregor as a back foot fighter, should he be put on his back foot. Certainly more consistent footwork as a back foot fighter than Rafael dos Anjos. But we have reason to be a little more confident in his wrestling and grappling ability than we do Conor McGregor's. He has a lot of the boxing ability of the range ability of Al Iaquinta. Like, it's not impossible for me to imagine seeing Dustin Poirier slipping out of single legs. But he's more likely than Iaquinta, I think, to get his back off the fence, which in my mind is the real problem area against Khabib. Like, there's a lot of, and the big thing for Poirier too, this is the thing that I don't think any of these other guys have had, is what we learned about him in that Justin Gaethje fight.
I think what we learned about him in all those fights.
Sure.
Because one of the big things about, Khabib has been him physically and mentally breaking people with his pressure.
Exactly.
And whilst they are stylistically nothing like Khabib, you don't get a better, mark on your resume, a better bunch of tick boxes on your resume than being able to say that you stood up to Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje, and Eddie Alvarez for and decisioned one and knocked out the other two.
Stayed relatively safe, made the right adjustments, and came back late to badly hurt those guys. I mean, that's the reason I still, up until the point that he left the UFC, I really wanted to see Eddie Alvarez versus Khabib, because he had a similar performance against Gaethje, and I think that is the big thing. It's not necessarily the specific wrestling situations. It's can you have a bad round against Khabib and then come out and make the right decisions to win the fight? Can you stay calm?
Has anyone ever dropped a clear round to Max Holloway and then come back to win, to still win a fight?
Not that I can recall. Not since several years ago in Holloway's career, at least.
Yeah, I literally don't think it's ever happened.
Yeah,
McGregor was on top of him pretty much from the start. I mean, so if you want just a pure mental and physical toughness, check for Dustin Poirier, he now has that in spades, and that is that's the combination of being the most impressive thing about his development, because I don't think he really had that before.
No.
I didn't think of Dustin Poirier as being an incredibly mentally durable fighter.
He has become mentally tough. It really, I don't think his chin has gotten better, but he seems to have gotten so much better at absorbing punches. It's not because he's become more durable. He just stays relaxed. He continues to think. We've said this several times, I think, the last several Dustin Poirier fights, but you can still see that it's something that's he's trained into himself. It's still not necessarily a part of his nature, but you can see him sort of switch the strategy switch in his head. When a fight gets a little hairy, when he gets into a dangerous situation, when he has a bad round, you can see him sort of turn off where he used to be, would have once been overcome by anxiety and started brawling. You can see him sort of turn the emotions off and just go to his training. And it's remarkable, because it's genuinely very, very rare that you see a fighter successfully train in something that is counter to their innate temperament. And Poirier seems to have totally absorbed that and made it a hallmark of his style. As you said, the last 3 fights, tough, pressuring opponents, known for building and getting stronger and breaking you down as the fight goes on. And Poirier continually just making the right decisions, making the right adjustments, keeping himself in the fight.
So we mentioned Rose Namajunas at one point as an example of this dynamic against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And this was, the way that she was able to beat Joanna is that we were expecting Rose starts quick, fades out, Joanna starts slow, builds up, Joanna's going to beat her that way. But what happened is that the rounds played out in that way, is that Rose would start quick and she would build up a lead, and then Joanna would have to try and take it away. At the end, so Rose would get worn down, but then she would come back and she would be the same again at the start of the next round, and it would be the same dynamic again, and it meant for a close competitive fight. What I think we see with Poirier is he's someone who used to break a bit. What we get from him now is kind of micro breaks and then healing. He kind of mentally recovers just very, very quickly. You can see he's got this whole array of little mental tricks he has to keep himself in the fight. He's full of, one of the things I like watching about it, he's full of ticks as he's fighting.
Yeah,
he's just he'll get punched and he'll back up and he'll be like, all right, left hand up, and you'll see him nod and sigh and take a deep breath, and then he'll tilt his head to one side he's just no, get out of there, and then he'll visibly settle down. He'll come back and he'll be the same again.
You'd almost be worried about that.
Break and reform. He's break and reform, break and reform, break and reform, and it makes for this very surprisingly consistent fighter.
Yeah, it reminds you of the sort of ticks that Johnny Hendricks used to have when he would get cracked, which should be worrying. But it seems to be maybe a little more like Dominic Cruz's little shoulder hunch. It's like a mental reset where it just sort of calms him down and reminds him, oh, this is exactly the thing I trained for. I expected to get hit. I expected bad things to happen. It's fine. It's part of the process.
And spitting on the floor.
Oh, yes. That's the Bayou coming out of Dustin Poirier. Okay, so the big question is, I want to talk about Khabib. Phil, people who listen to this show know that I have a very public vendetta against Valentina Shevchenko. She is my arch nemesis, and one of these days, I will see her undone. I will destroy her. I don't think people know that you are a little bit of a closet Khabib hater.
It is true.
Can you explain why that is? Because I totally sympathize with it. Khabib, you and I talk all the time about athleticism is cheating. It lets you do things other people don't do. And I think Khabib is like the example of that dynamic. There's so much that Khabib sort of gets away with. There's so much about his game that doesn't feel functional, and yet it always works. What's going on with Khabib? Like, what are your problems with his style, and why does he make it work so consistently?
He's a very strange thing with Khabib, because on the one hand, he's such an intelligent, analytical fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you listen to him breaking down other fighters, he's very good at predicting what they're going to do. He's generally fairly good at predicting style matchups.
Mm-hmm.
Not always great. Obviously, like all fighters, he tends to pick the person who's the most like him. But, so it's like you said, basically. I don't really feel like his game really works that well. He's a wrestler, and I don't really understand how he sets up his shots.
Yeah, that's a big thing, right?
Yeah, for me, he's an odd mixture, which doesn't really quite work, of like GSP's game and Colby Covington's game. But neither one of them, he's neither one or t'other. And
don't say t'other on this show. That's final warning.
What would Tom Watson do? He's neither one or the other. So this leaves him as sort of a confident, straight-backed, occasional combination puncher who, makes up for technique and pure enthusiasm, and then it makes him someone who goes for shots from range. But he doesn't have the ability to pressure behind his shots that Covington, for example, has.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have the ability to kind of throw away strikes as he's advancing to move into the clinch. Nor does he have GSP's ability to hide his strikes with level changes, because GSP would just, he would just drop his level and jab and drop his level and jab and push you back with it,
right,
until you were either backed up into the fence or you tried to swing back at him, in which case he would change levels and take you down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily feel like Khabib has a functional game plan which works in either of those ways that even goes that deep. A lot of what he does is, it makes sense. He does, as I think we've mentioned, Kevin Lee has a tendency to not do. He always makes sure that he gets his wrestling going early, that he imprints that onto his opponents as soon as physically possible.
Because his great strength is the mental threat of you get sucked in and then you can't escape. And that's already a part of his fights. Opponents already have to deal with that just knowing they're fighting him. He reminds you right away, this is why you were nervous about fighting me.
And a lot of the time they're also just kind of exhausted and beaten up because he's incredibly physically powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also blindingly fast. So a lot of the start of a Khabib fight is just him lunging across open space, and then he'll grab some incredibly what would be a weak takedown for someone else, and then convert it anyway.
Yeah, that's what I want to say. How many elite fighters now rely on low single legs as their entry?
Mm-hmm.
That is 20 years out of date. That is so not a part of the MMA metagame, and it is a fundamental, that's Khabib's main shot in open space, is the low single. The thing is, the one thing that's crazy is he makes it work. He must have an incredible grip, and he's so tenacious that once he attaches to a limb or gets in on the shot, he keeps working and keeps adjusting. So Khabib might grab your ankle and you try to limp leg out, but then he's dropping his shoulder into you and collapsing your frame and then climbing quickly up your leg like a spider monkey and getting around your back and getting to the waist. But still, it's an entry that shouldn't work. And given a couple rounds to burn off energy and a little time to see those shots coming, for example, against Ally Quinta, it didn't work. in the third round against Conor McGregor. It didn't work. And if Khabib had not gotten a double in the fourth round, who knows how that fight would have shaken out? Because McGregor was seeing those low single shots coming, as pretty much every fighter eventually must be able to. It's a really, really telegraphed takedown.
I mean, McGregor was very nearly out that first takedown attempt from Khabib anyway.
Yeah, true.
Like, it was very, very close to not working.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was sort of my thought in the Iaquinta fight, is that the first time he got him with like a low single into, grabbing Iaquinta's little toe and then converting that into a takedown, I was like, that is incredible.
Right.
And then the second time, I was just like,
oh, now he's sweaty. Is
this your primary entry?
Yeah, like now that he's sweaty, he can limp like out of every one. And he did.
But on the other hand, he's also lightning fast, freakishly powerful, mm-hmm. very durable, and seems to have an incredible gas tank.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is sort of, and that he's just an incredible technical. I mean, we can say that his game, his entry game on the feet, is perhaps not the most evolved in the world, but his ability to keep people down, to either sit on their legs or just convert rides and top position into entire rounds worth of grinding, brutal top control is genuinely phenomenal.
I'm saying this specifically to piss people off, but he is a souped up version of a male Ronda Rousey. Like the defining things about Khabib are how well connected his takedown and grappling games are, how perfectly one flows into the other, how tenacious he is once he gets a hold of something, how good he is at misdirecting and setting traps, both on the feet when he's tied up and once he's on the ground. And yet the striking is so disconnected from that. Like I remember when Khabib first came to the UFC, I was like, okay, that's cool. He does this leaping uppercut thing, and he does that high shot that Alexander Gustafsson likes. That kind of works together. I want to see how this striking game continues to inform his grappling choices. And it just hasn't gone beyond that. It's... I
mean, when he dropped McGregor, that was one of the few times I've seen him hit something I would describe as natural. That was him using the classic.
Faking a shot and hitting the overhand, yeah. He does that so rarely, though.
Yeah, it's bizarrely infrequent.
And I think it's something fundamental about his technique. This is the thing that really reminds you that Khabib is an AKA fighter.
Mm-hmm.
That he whenever he's striking, Khabib's super fast. He's got great eyes. For someone with no fundamental defensive skills in the feet, he's got great eyes. He really sees shots coming and he makes adjustments. But the adjustments he makes get him out of position. And even when he's quick enough not to take damage, because of that, he's not in position to then transition back to his A game. So the striking and the two grappling and wrestling parts of his game are really connected to each other, but the striking's so disconnected from that that there have to be openings there. There has to be a fighter who can take advantage.
So I did describe his striking as being more than a little bit like Daniel Cormier on Fast Forward.
Yeah, I think that's apt.
He has the same tendency to kind of flail.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that he is actually worse on offense than Cormier, because Cormier's striking actually is built with a purpose, which is to get him into the clinch.
Yeah, and he puts combinations together.
But he is much better on defense, in that he is much more likely to see shots coming,
mm-hmm.
pick them off, move out of the way.
But worse at turning that defense, I think, into his wrestling offense. Cormier is actually pretty good at that.
Yep.
So here's my final question. This is going to be a long segment, but I think everyone listening, hopefully you expected that. This is the reason for this card to exist. This is the fight. How do you fight Khabib? If Dustin Poirier is having his fight against Khabib, what does that fight look like? Obviously he's almost certainly going to go through some tough spots. He's going to end up on bottom at some point. He's going to end up pressed against the cage. He's going to get taken down. And we are counting on you know, or we're at least expecting to see something different from him as an opponent because of the calm, methodical way we've seen him approach so many other daunting opponents in recent memory. But like, what kind of fight is it when Poirier is having his fight? I mean, is it pressuring? Seems like a good idea, right? You don't want to get pressured by Khabib. That's when it's just pace and relentless aggression and him taking away your ability to make decisions with his speed. I think Poirier will be a little better at avoiding that because of the footwork, but he still wants to avoid that. So is it just as simple as backing Khabib up?
Yeah, so the other thing about pressuring, obviously, is that like Khabib's takedowns are very dependent on the fence.
Yes.
And that he can do what, for example, Usman does, which is to just, as soon as he gets a takedown connection, just run the other guy into the fence. He's just going to literally charge there. But this gives you many more opportunities to like break the grips, turn him, like... If you're backed into the fence, you've done a lot of his work for him.
Exactly,
so yeah, I think that's definitely true.
McGregor's success in the third round of their fight was largely him angling off those takedowns.
Yep. Secondly, you know, so I think friend of the show, Danny Martin, mentioned this. You should hit Khabib to the body. I mean, if he is Daniel Cormier on Fast Forward, then he's going to prioritize defending his head when he does defend.
Every fighter
in general, he tends to lean back a lot.
Every fighter who has bad or spotty defense has even worse body strike defense.
Yeah. And what you need to do is to make it, because I would suspect he has grappler cardio, meaning if you fight him in a grappling fight, he will have incredible cardio forever. And you will always get tired faster than him.
A lot of his fighting on the ground is, like, his wrestling has a lot of strength. Once he's on the ground, it's a lot of just position, using his weight so he can afford to catch his breath. Yep.
And yes, it is always built. It is fundamentally built so that you will have to exert much more effort than him to get from position A to position B. And then once you're in position B, he's like, oh yeah, by the way, I still have, wrist control. I'm still stripping out the post that you're trying to use to get up, and I'm sitting on your legs, and, there's always something else that's putting you on the wrong end of the cardio equation. But he said that he wasn't tired after the McGregor fight, but he kind of looked like he was in those striking exchanges.
He at least had to take a round to recover.
Yeah. He looked like he had to get a second win.
And the Iaquinta fight was much like that too. He looked like he'd slowed down in the fourth round, and then in the fifth, he put everything into one takedown attempt and sealed the last round with that. McGregor fight was not so different.
Yeah. So I think the best thing Poirier can do is keep the jab on him, keep Khabib's spotty defense rolling. And then try and just move into combinations where he hits the body. He's going to have to... He needs that when Khabib shoots, it should be in open ground. I think problems that we've seen from Poirier... I mean, so we've mentioned that Khabib has fought not the most amazing selection of lightweights. And this is, he's fought very, very good people. That's not, but for the lightweight division, it is perhaps not the most, it isn't the greatest resume out there. But Poirier, for his own part, has fought largely strikers. Who's the best wrestler that Poirier's fought?
It's Eddie Alvarez, and Eddie Alvarez, this is a cause for concern, in both of their fights, not only got Poirier down, although I will say, in the second one, Poirier kept pulling guillotines. I don't think he'll make that decision against Khabib. I do think he knew he could get away with that against Alvarez. I have to assume his training camp will have been spent, his coaches screaming at him, don't try to submit this guy. So I'm going to assume he's going to make the right call and not drop for a guillotine against Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's more of a Michael Johnson move than a Dustin Poirier one at this point. But in both of those fights, when Alvarez did have Poirier down in bottom position, he did a really good job of staying over him against the fence, keeping his weight on top of him and controlling the position. And Poirier can stay calm and work out of those positions, but there's not really anyone who has a top game as sort of like methodically one-directional as Khabib's, where everything is driving you into the next trapping position. It's getting the body lock, you give your back to stand, then you expose your leg for that one hook and he can ride your leg, and then you have to kind of turn away from that to try and free your leg, and then he can grapevine your wrist from the other side, and then you have to deal with that, and while you're dealing with it, he can punch you, and all the while, you are only reacting to the pressure he's putting on you. You're not making any like sovereign decisions to get back to your feet. So that's a cause for concern, definitely. I mean, it's Khabib, you know, like
yeah.
Dustin Poirier may be the most.
It's the other thing where, like, you know, even if you have fought good wrestlers, you've never fought Khabib.
Yeah, this is a guy who combines incredible wrestling and grappling technique with the knowledge that he can afford to put all of his muscle into a position and just overpower you to keep the pace on you, to keep you reactive. Khabib has like a beautiful selection of takedowns, but also half the time he'll just grab a single and fucking lift you off your feet and drop you. You know, like he just hulks people a lot of the time too. And like, there's no reason for me to think Poirier. I'll say this: Poirier is a big dude now. I lamented that after the Holloway fight, that the guy we celebrated for moving up in weight and it helping to turn his career around is now a massive lightweight. He's probably at least as heavy as Khabib. And that size really seemed to translate into huge power, even for Poirier standards, against Max Holloway. Maybe that also translates to just having the strength necessary to hang in the clinch, but no one's done it before. It's a lot to assume that somebody's going to be able to stop Khabib overpowering them once he's got a tie-up.
Yep. The other thing is that, like, traditionally, I mean, Poirier's defense has gotten so much better. Mm-hmm. His ability to pick shots off with his like elbows and shoulder and his like, and just by ducking his head and so on,
and moving his feet. There's layers to it now. Yeah.
Has just improved out of sight together with his. I mean, so Jack Slack put out his casuals guide to Filthy Casuals Guide to Dustin Poirier, which was excellent, but it was just a shock to once again like to look at old Poirier compared to new Poirier in terms of like defense. But one thing that has traditionally troubled Poirier is kind of punches and shots up the middle. I'm thinking of stuff like the Korean Zombie fight. His tendency to kind of block at the sides with his arms has meant that he's pretty good against like straight punches, but Jung did find him with knees and uppercuts, like with some regularity. And whilst I would not class Khabib as a good striker, I would class him as someone who likes throwing raw uppercuts and flying knees. So that's a kind of it's a kind of not something I expect to happen thing, but just a kind of X factor to chuck out there.
And as I said before, that is one of those singular striking skills that is actually attached to Khabib's wrestling game. That actually mechanically works to set up a shot.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, Poirier does dip his head a reasonable amount. But yeah, so I think, Poirier's defensive wrestling is going to get a workout. I think his ability to scramble back to the feet has thus far been pretty good, and they're going to be working on that a lot. I don't think that he's going to be able to go down the Tony Ferguson route of attacking Khabib from his back, and I think if he does, it would be a mistake. But he is a very good guillotine and choke and snap down guy.
Probably better to focus on the snap downs and not sink in the guillotine. Just to too high risk against this particular opponent.
So what about Khabib? So I think for Khabib's from Khabib's perspective, I don't necessarily expect him to improve his level changes, but I do think he needs to kick a lot.
Yeah. That would bring a little more of that Colby Covington energy.
Yep. And he's shown a, if not like particularly nuanced, a dangerous kicking game against guys like Barboza. Because I think other than that, he's going to just be conceding range. Yeah. And he's going to have to waste a lot of energy on takedowns.
Yeah, but even it requires that he be pressuring, that he not be being pressured at least. So, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. I think he needs ranged weapons that he can rely on. I mean, admittedly, kicking, if he's throwing raw kicks, it may not necessarily be the greatest idea, simply because Poirier clearly learned a shit ton of trigger counters to them KG fight. But I think he needs weapons at range, and he needs to pull Poirier into either big shots or into takedown series.
I think we need to see a lot of also just implied volume from Khabib. We need a lot of feints. He needs to throw off the timing of those Poirier counters, and that is going to be his window back into pressuring. If he can get Poirier second guessing about when he should let a counter go, because otherwise Khabib is very counterable, and you have to worry about when I sit down in a counter, is he going to take me down? But at a certain point, as we said, there's not that much variety in open space to Khabib's entries. And it's not like once he gets into the clinch at open space, Poirier can't use his clinch skills. Conor McGregor hit him with plenty of good knees and a couple of elbows when they tied up in the clinch. Poirier is a better clinch striker and better clinch wrestler than Conor McGregor. So I think we got to make a pick. We've been talking about 36 minutes. I feel like I could still break this down and talk about possibilities, but it's such a fascinating fight. Hopefully you listeners feel that we have at least laid out the general dynamic accurately. Now comes the time to put our necks out, though, and make a pick. I think, are we both leaning Dustin Poirier?
I am, yes.
Yeah. I think I'm going to pick him. It feels way too risky, and now that I've said it out loud, I'm scared, and I want to take it back. But I think it's the right combination of poise, of mental ability, diversity of skill and approach, and just literally being one of the very best strikers Khabib has ever faced, and one of the most consequential. One of the ones, you don't want to make too many fucking mistakes against Dustin Poirier, because the consequences are dire.
Yeah. I mean, as we mentioned last time, Khabib's style is not going to lend itself to... I mean, the last time we broke down a Khabib fight, his style is not going to lend itself to competitive fights.
No.
It is... One or the other. This is sort of the grappler dynamic, is that it either really works or it really doesn't. So if he wins this, there is a significant chance that it is just a one-sided mauling. If he loses this, there is also a significant chance that it is just a one-sided mauling.
Yeah. Although that means... Go on, sorry.
If he can't get the, the first crazy low shot single leg to come out, then he may actually just end up getting chewed up horribly.
True. Yeah, the first round, as it always does in Khabib fights, is going to be really pivotal. But also, Dustin Poirier, at this point in his career... he's maybe the guy I would expect most to be able to come back from a bad first round against Khabib. So I think it's going to be dominance happening round by round, but there is still an opportunity to get in there and make it the other kind of fight in the next round. If just being able to see that first shot coming, or even if it's just working up enough sweat that playing the same game plan in the next round enables you to get out of those low shot singles. If you can keep Khabib backing up, if you can keep him reactive and striking with you in open space, then there's his striking's not that good. So somebody's got to be able to beat him on the feet. I think it's Dustin Poirier, but man, am I looking forward to finding out for sure. All right, so that's 40 minutes on the main event of UFC 242. We're leaving all that shit in because I think it was a good discussion, and I really enjoy thinking about matchups like this, and how many matchups are there really like this. After this, we are going to dip our toes into the rest of UFC 242, probably fairly quickly, given how much time we've spent on this, and then we're going to dip our toes into what happened last week after that. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands, and I mean welcome back this time. We are going to, I think I'm wrestle and grappled out. Phil, we delved into it. And now, in characteristic Heavy Hands fashion, I think we're going to talk about the two striking matches on this main card. I am looking forward. I think Makhachev-Hamosh can be some very exciting scrambles in that. Makhachev is one of those grapplers who does pretty much always seem to engage in the grappling contest you want to see against other grapplers. Curtis Blades, I'm very excited, and I really enjoy dynamic heavyweight wrestling. It's maybe the heavyweight style I enjoy seeing the most. Maybe because it's still so novel in that shit show of a division. But there are two striking matchups, that primarily striking matchups at the very least here, that are really tantalizing. Edson Barboza versus Paul Felder and Mairbek Taisumov versus Carlos Diego Ferreira. It has indeed been almost a year since we last saw Taisumov in the octagon, so looking forward to that. But the co-main event, this is a rematch of... What was it? Paul Felder's second or third UFC fight?
I think he had a few. This was after it was his third fight. He had a close matchup with someone, then he knocked out Danny Castillo, was it, with a spinning back fist, and then they put him up against Barboza?
Yep. There was the split against Jason Sago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I kind of miss Jason Sago. He was pretty good.
Yeah, he was cool.
So yeah, he fought Edson Barboza. They engaged in what was, while impressive, also a comically spinny matchup. Both of them just daring the other to do the best spin move. And that is not the kind of game you want to play with Edson Barboza when you are especially a younger but slower and less polished version of that kind of striker. This time around, I think we can definitely say Paul Felder has grown and matured. Edson Barboza, meanwhile, has also matured. I think he has continued to polish and tighten up his game. And I'm not sure that Paul Felder can really exploit those Edson Barboza flaws that we were so used to seeing. So, what do you think about this?
I will say, in their first fight, Edson Barboza landed one of the most picturesque nut shots I've ever seen in the UFC, if not MMA as a whole. I mean, the winner in like MMA as a whole is clearly that one in whatever that regional show was, where the guy literally does like the somersaulting nut stomp.
Oh yes,
but
the aerial nut stomp.
Edson Barboza's spinning back kick to the nuts of Paul Felder was truly impressive.
Maybe the last strike I want to take. Although there was also the Eric Prindle axe kick to the balls.
Oh yes, made even better by being heavyweight.
Yeah,
but yeah. So this is one of our do style matchups really change over time? Can people change their destiny kind of fights? Because Paul Felder has had a little miniature resurgence here, and some of it has showcased like really nice adaptation and thought from him. I mean, you can tell by listening to him as a commentator, he is like a thoughtful, clever guy,
profoundly analytical person.
Yeah, but the problem obviously is that this doesn't necessarily always translate into people being thoughtful, fighters because so much of fighting is unconscious.
Well, the same thing you noted about Khabib, like his analysis sort of belying his fighting style at times. That is also true of Daniel Cormier. There are fighters who are really good at understanding the dynamics, but then when it comes to making specific preparations for an opponent or, I don't know, adjusting to the same thing that's been haunting you throughout your career, they just can't do it.
Yeah. But, so I think for Paul Felder, he showed a much more, encouraging understanding of what he needs to do against certain style matchups, namely James Vick, when he pushed James Vick into the fence and kicked out his lead leg. And he's rarely kind of shown that before. I think a lot of the specific improvements we've seen from Paul Felder over time have been, I mean, he's just been someone who's just generally gotten better.
I think he is genuinely just like emotionally and mentally matured. Like that Edson Barboza fight was him trying to measure dicks with a more experienced and much faster kickboxer. He went in there and was like, I'm going to try to beat you at exactly your fight. And likewise, I remember very well his fight with Ross Pearson, where he played right into Ross Pearson's hands. Ross Pearson, famously a fighter who doesn't realize how much better he is off the back foot than he is off the front foot. And if you just let him come to you, especially if you are a pretty good counterpuncher like Paul Felder, you can beat him. And Paul Felder, for 3 rounds, got more and more mad and just kept stalking after Pearson, eating jabs and left hooks. The James Vick fight, I think, is a great example, or the Charles Oliveira fight, of him sort of staying calm and making the right decisions, both strategically and tactically.
To an extent, I would say.
Yeah, but better than he was.
Yeah, because I think Felder is always someone who's he's kind of generally happy to have the fight that people give him. And I mean, the Oliveira fight was one where he was able to break Oliveira, but it was also one where he kind of broke him by grappling with him. Yeah. And I don't know whether that was maybe strategically the best idea.
Yeah, Paul Felder is a secret grappler, actually. Like, I'm kind of curious to see if he might try to take Barboza down.
I mean, that was what we were kind of talking about before the Mike Perry fight, right? We were like, is he really a striker?
Right.
Or is he secretly just actually a pretty good wrestler and top control guy and clinch fighter? Because that's how he won most of his fights since he lost to Trinaldo. The James Vick fight is actually something of an anomaly. It's his first, clear striking performance that he's won in a while. So the question is, so he's become a more effective clinch fighter, wrestler. He's shown that he knows how to pressure now, and that he can solve basic style matchups. The question is that we have also seen this from Dan Hooker. We saw Dan Hooker solve James Vick, and we saw Dan Hooker get absolutely wrecked by Edson Barboza. So a lot of the fight with James Vick, it did involve him pressuring Vick, but not in the same crazy, full-on aggressive way that we've really seen tends to freak Barboza out.
Barboza can deal with pressure.
It was a lot of sort of exchanging at kick range, a lot of kicking with him.
Barboza can deal with pressure. It's swarming that is his problem. It's relentless pressure that he can't deal with.
Yeah, in many ways, fighting
worse.
In some ways, worse strikers have been able to freak him out more.
Khabib just ran at him throwing everything, and it worked beautifully.
Or Kevin Lee.
Yeah.
He was just I'm just going to keep coming forward, and then once Barboza's circling reaches a certain critical speed, he becomes completely defensively useless.
Yeah, because it comes to the situation of, well, I can keep sprinting at 30 miles an hour backwards and side to side, or I can plant my feet and trade, and those are the only 2 choices he can make.
Yeah, he does not pivot, he does not deflect, and he doesn't really... He's very fast, but he is not powerful in the clinch. And
he doesn't really stick and move that well. Once he is moving, he doesn't really work behind his jab. That would be such a huge improvement for Barboza if he could just sort of step forward on an angle when he's doing that and move behind his jab, retreat without actually having to retreat.
Yeah.
But
But so unfortunately for Felder, it seems like whilst he's learned to like push people into the fence, he likes mid-range. He is still slow.
Yeah. That's a big factor.
He needs to be either the better. Generally seems to need to be like the better kicker in the fight. I think it's a step too far.
Yeah, I think that broke it down perfectly. Honestly, I agree. Felder's made good decisions, but the same limitations that made that first style matchup an Edson Barboza fight. Now, granted, it was a competitive fight. Felder's very tough. He's got good form on his strikes. He can make this a competitive fight, but Barboza's speed and conditioning, his ability to throw out lots and lots of volume and come out the next round fresh, and he's so quick, and I just don't think Felder has the right kind of pressure to give us that classic Edson Barboza loss. So, Barboza for me too. Okay, well, let's talk about the other thrilling striker on this card. Now, am I talking about Carlos Diego Ferreira or Mairbek Taisumov? Because Carlos Diego Ferreira is, in fact, a thrilling striker. He's powerful and insane. And he loves to go in and exchange combinations with people. Maybe more so than anyone else I can think of Taisumov having fought before. So, yeah, what do you think?
It's an interesting one. I think it might be a pretty bad matchup for Ferreira. But then I kind of thought that Rustam Khabilov might be tricky for him, but that was in fact not the case. Sorry,
a little bit of background noise there as I'm fight passing over here.
So, Taisumov is someone that we've seen kind of consistently slip under the radar because he can't get fights in the US.
Yes. Unfortunately, that'll do it in the UFC.
Which means that they're just never going to give him anyone ranked.
Yep.
And, but other than that, he's been incredibly impressive.
Yep.
I mean, he's just been a knockout machine since his first, at the time, baffling, and since then, more understandable loss to Michel Brazeres.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, they've pretty much just given him bangers, and he's mostly just fucked them up.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a really consistent, powerful, composed range kickboxer.
Yeah, and his counterpunching is like the ace up his sleeve. He is a tremendously good counterpuncher.
Yep. Another one of these guys out of... he's a Tiger Muay Thai guy, right?
I think so, yeah.
They've just been putting out really impressive strikers.
Mm-hmm. I like that, by the way. We are in an era of new camps emerging. Fortis MMA, Tiger Muay Thai. I like that. I like the metagame sort of changing as other teams assert themselves.
So the question here is, how much does Ferreira's game rely on him being allowed unchecked aggression? And how much does... So I thought that Khabilov might be a tricky matchup for him because he would be able to out-wrestle him.
Mm-hmm.
But Ferreira is so good on the ground that was not an option for Khabilov, and then it became clear that Khabilov is not a good striker. So how much does, Ferreira he's someone who has an ability to, throw a lot of combinations on the feet, and he's also always had a freakishly good knack for picking up backstepping counters.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys are just good when they're stepping forward, when they're kind of crazy wild men. But he's genuinely good at, I don't want to mean in any kind of clear technical sense, but
he's innately good.
He has very good instincts.
Yeah. He's
in all situations.
His striking reminds me a lot of Francisco Trinaldo's. He is innately good. He's got good timing. Even in exchanges where he will wince and duck and take his eyes off his opponent, he still has a good feel for the distance as they're coming towards him. He's just an instinctively good striker. His technique is better than it used to be, which is, I don't know, maybe damning with faint praise. But he's super aggressive. He can throw really good combinations. He can follow his punch combinations with kicks. He's going to be there to be countered, but Taisimov doesn't like a fast-paced fight, you know? He would much prefer, I think, the opportunity to slowly pick someone off. Is Fejeda's footwork good enough to keep Taisimov in front of him? I think that's a big question.
Yeah. So, I mean, that Prazeres fight is always the one which I have in the back of my mind for Taisimov, because it was so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the fact that not only did he just get bowled over by takedowns, is that he just visibly gave up.
Mm-hmm.
But ever since then, he's been fairly unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, can you make him do that with striking as opposed to wrestling? And I'm going to say probably not. I think the problem with Ferreira is that he does rely on just being able to out aggression and out power people on the feet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if he runs into someone who can counter him, who's able to kind of crack back without necessarily a lot of fear, yeah, exactly, you kind of end up with the Dustin Poirier situation.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought as well.
Yeah, I think he might be on his way to maybe a first round knockout again.
Yeah, but the thing is like I said, Fejeda's got feel. That Poirier fight, he had his moments. You know, he hit Poirier with some good shots. He was in some competitive exchanges. I'm going to pick Taisimov here for all the reasons that we've laid out, but I've not seen Taisimov face a fighter who will do what I think Ferreira is going to try to do to him. There's only really one way that Carlos Diego Ferreira fights, and it is unchecked aggression. And Taisimov generally does a lot of work with his positioning and the threat of his counters, of getting the opponent to slow down and check their own advance. So, yeah, at the very least, I'm going to get to see Taisimov in some exchanges, I think, and that's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, it's notable that he's generally fought people who are either physically outclassed or very low pace.
Yes. Yeah. This is maybe the first guy he's fought who's not like a one-shot-at-a-time striker. And we lost Phil. Damn, I'd stopped recording. I didn't get that lovely quip as you came back. Repeat that line, Phil. It was a good one.
How dare you call Anthony Christodoulou a one-shot-at-a-time striker?
I note that you changed your pronunciation of Christodoulou between attempt 1 and 2. I would have done the same. All right, well, a little technical snafu, but I think that's that fight pretty much covered. Merabek Taisimov, you have to assume the speed, the counters are going to be a factor. Even at times his wrestling game works really nicely as an anti-pressure tool. I doubt he'll want to hang out for long periods of time on the ground with Ferreira, but it's always a good idea for a striker to have that takedown in their back pocket. So you got to assume he's going to win, but it's going to be a fun fight, and there's a chance for Ferreira because he's so crazy. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're done with UFC 242, I think. Instead, we're going to look backwards at the main and co-main event of last week's UFC Shenzhen card.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. UFC Shenzhen. The co-main event and the main event were the fights worth thinking about for more than 10 seconds in this card. It was not a bad card to watch. There were some good fights. The Chinese fighters, like the Brazilians in Brazil, they tend to show up for their home crowd, and there were some really good pops. There was an exciting atmosphere that added a layer of fun to it. Also, you didn't have to stay up really late on a Saturday night to watch it, which is always a bonus. But really, I just watched the main card. Let's talk about the main event. There's not a whole lot to say. I was relieved after I saw what happened, that we correctly read Weili Zhang as a potentially very dangerous matchup for Jessica Andrade. However, I don't think either of us expected her to just knock her the fuck out in 40 seconds.
No, I don't think many people did.
Yeah, that was the surprising part. It wasn't that she had the tools to compete. It was that she brought those tools to bear really emphatically, really early. And the moment they started to work, Jessica Andrade went what I think everyone will now be calling full cyborg. It was very much a Cyborg Nunes kind of moment where she just made the decision to bite down. It's funny because last week we talked about Andrade's performances becoming less Lineker-ish in the same way that Lineker's own performances had become kind of less Lineker-ish. She was starting a little slower and seeming a little more aimless. That might have been good for her here to try a few kicks, to try hitting the body a little bit, try a few bursts forward. Instead, she just went full Cyborg, full Fabricio Verdum, ran at Weili Zhang, and obliterated herself as much as Zhang obliterated her.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will say to her credit, at least she went to the clinch. At least she didn't just stand there winging punches over and over again while she got knocked out like Cyborg did.
Did she go to the clinch? I think she got knocked down and stood up into the clinch, and then we saw something that we've kind of known for quite a while. Unless she's body locking you or single legging you, in a tie clinch, Andrade is not very good. Angela Hill had success against her there. Tisha Torres had success against her there. No one's had as much success, though, as Weili Zhang.
I mean, Rose Namajunas knocked her down in the clinch.
Oh, yeah.
The clinch knee.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this was a major problem for her, that she has not actually been particularly good in the clinch, despite it, theoretically being the area in which you want to completely avoid. So, yeah, I mean, it was a confluence of a few, perfect factors there for Weili Zhang, in that she was able to both hurt Andrade, and she was kind of young and fearless and big and powerful enough that she was just like, I don't care about tying up with you. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to beat the shit out of you. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was very impressive. I mean, we knew she was big and tough and strong and athletic. I didn't know that she could just deal out that much damage that quickly.
It was also for as long as it lasted. I mean, we knew she was capable of this. The question was, could she do it for an entire fight? And we still don't know. But for as long as it lasted, it was a smart performance. She was keeping her distance. She was trying kicks and jabs. Andrade started to come on. She countered, and then she was moving laterally. She kept Andrade. She really took advantage, for as long as it lasted, of Andrade's terrible cage-cutting footwork. Immediately had her following her along the fence into another counter. And then, the moment she got the clinch, it was just a maelstrom of knees and elbows. Several of them to the back of the head. But, when you get clinched, don't bend over at the waist and look at the floor. Mm-hmm. It's not good for the knees or the elbows.
Yeah. So in the run-up to this fight, I did find myself, there was one thing I kept thinking of, was this one exchange where, in the Torres fight, where Weili Zhang just set her feet and she just threw 3 really hard, really accurate punches without breaking her stance. Mm-hmm. And that was all. It just ended up sticking in my head, the whole time in the run-up to the actual fight. I was just thinking, what if she just does that?
Yeah. And
she's just big. And, it was really sticking in my head for whatever reason. And, because, Namajunas was 3 times, more skilled than Andrade, but it didn't matter because there was a kind of physical disparity that she couldn't overcome.
Yeah.
And it looked like Zhang was a reasonable amount more skilled than Andrade, but it was the fact that just the physical equation wasn't tilted nearly as far in her direction. She didn't need to be that much better than her. She just needed to be a bit better than her. And then it was just, she was powerful and dangerous and nasty enough that she just ran over all Andrade's defensive deficiencies immediately. She didn't have to be like, oh, I don't need to worry about clinching up with this person. She just did it and killed her.
Yeah. That was about it. There's not much more to break down about this fight. Zhang had the horsepower to fight a slightly riskier fight, but also the skills to make it less risky than it would have been for a lot of other fighters. Andrade is like she's technically a really crude striker. It's just hooking combinations. It's her coming forward with her head staying in one place, walking right into counters. And then we've known for a while that her clinch skills, but I don't think we knew how good Weili Zhang's clinch attack would be. But also, at that point, I don't think it mattered all that much how technically good she was in the clinch, because Andrade had already been dropped. She was hurt with a left hook in the very first punch exchange. Then she was hurt with a pair of elbows as she crashed into the pocket. Zhang moves along the fence. Andrade chases her, still throwing, reaching across space, and she gets dropped hard with the right hand. At that point, she was on Queer Street. So, like, Andrade being bad in the clinch is enough to explain why it played out that way. So, yeah, Weili Zhang. Congratulations to the UFC, who will now be inveigling themselves into Chinese society and probably bringing it down, much as they've brought down the society over here. Really like a cancer on the ass of America is the UFC. So, China, congratulations. Now you've got a UFC champ. You're just as lost as we are. The co-main event, Phil, is the one that I really wanted to talk about. We did not give the Leech much of a shot against Lizzie Zaleski dos Santos. We gave him credit for his ability to adapt. We gave him credit for the aspects of his boxing game that are genuinely very good. But we didn't expect him to fight the right kind of fight to beat Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. More than that, I'm not sure we knew that maybe what kind of approaches dos Santos is vulnerable to. It's really the first opponent he's faced who has effectively stayed on the back foot, changing angles, making him close the gap and countering him and punishing him for doing so, making him chase and then trapping him. We didn't see Li Jingliang doing that because he'd never done it before, and he did it so well in this fight. I was so impressed by the Leech. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, this was one of those fights where you just see it, and then a lot of the time when I get a fight wrong in like the way it's going to look, I'm slightly annoyed with myself in that I'm like, well, how did you not see that one coming? Even now, I find myself just thinking, no, I had no reason. I just had no reason to assume that he would be able to do that.
Just happy to be proven wrong, because it made me
amazing.
Happy to watch. Like when fighters develop and make key adjustments for their matchups, like it's a sign of personal growth. Fighting, maybe more than any other sport, is really tied to like what kind of person you are. That really, really comes out in the cage. So like it feels momentous when a fighter like the Leech, if someday Chito Vera goes in there and fights like a beautifully disciplined performance and just calmly outboxes someone, it's going to feel that good, because I know the problems. I have some idea of the problems mentally that he's grappling with every time he steps into the cage. We just saw the Leech overcome a career-long stylistic limitation. It felt good to be proven wrong.
Yep. It was, we've seen him adapt, but we've seen him adapt in the context of being a front foot pressure banger who basically mixes up a jab feint with a big right hand and a leg kick.
Yep.
And then this time we saw him circling around, like circling off, defusing entries, pivoting away, hitting check hooks.
Triple jabbing his way off the fence when he did get into a bad position.
Beautiful. It was one of the most stark stylistic transformations I've seen. And normally when you get those, they tend to be from elite talents.
Elite athletes, yeah.
Yeah, people who are just like, oh yeah, I've decided to do this and now I've been able to just pick it up.
Cheaters.
You don't see guys like the Leech doing that.
Yeah.
I will say that I think it was probably a little closer than perhaps people gave it credit for. It did come close to not working.
There were key moments that the leech needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That first big right hand where you can't take away the credit of him drawing ZDS onto like lazy entries,
positioning,
and then
timing, setup,
a laser right down the middle.
Yeah. Can I talk about that shot? Like, I just want to say how much I loved that sequence.
Go for it.
The three things I just mentioned, the positioning, he set that up with the footwork, right? He spent the majority of the first round coaxing Dos Santos into following him, into chasing him more and more urgently. And that was only increased after the first big, like, sort of shifting combo that he landed clean in the first round. Dos Santos knew he had to get on the leech. So he had him following. He drew him in, circling to his right, and then changes to his left. He got Dos Santos overcompensating for the lateral movement. He got him crossing his feet and getting out of position, so that when he then changed direction, Dos Santos did not adjust enough to get that outside foot position. He was in a southpaw stance, and the leech had an easy line to get that outside angle. Timing, he caught Dos Santos at the exact perfect time. He caught him bouncing up and down. It's not like Dos Santos bounces too much even. He was really he does that sort of shifting his weight, hopping. He was hop stepping. It's a good technical piece of footwork, but there's still a tiny moment in there where one of your feet is not rooted. And he caught him at the exact moment when he was highest in that arcing bounce. His back foot was not planted, and he had no base to absorb the shot. And then finally, the thing that you mentioned before, like the setups to the right hand, always being that's always been a facet of the Leech's boxing game. Really, really good at setting up the right hand. He'll throw the jab off. He's really tricky with how he times it. He gets you to read like half a beat with a bunch of different moves that either draw your eye or throw off your timing, and then he springs the right hand on you. And in addition to moving his feet, in addition to choosing the exact right moment to do it, he does this tricky little drop step thing where he sort of drops his weight as he steps forward with his front foot, but it's not the full level change you expect it to be. It's half a beat. It's dip punch, and it just sort of glides into the punch. It's really deceptive how much distance he can cover and the timing on the shot too. So like that sequence was everything. That was a microcosm of the whole fight. It's just like technically perfect choices made in this matchup.
Yep. It was also, we have to say, a very bad performance from Dos Santos in a lot of ways.
Thank you for bringing that up.
It did expose his complete inability to close down lateral movement. It may have been simply that he didn't train for the Leech, as in he didn't train for the guy that he got in front of him, which, in all honesty, I would find a totally acceptable explanation, because I didn't expect to see that guy either.
Whoa, yeah, he definitely didn't train for that Leech. Even if he did do any specific preparation, it wouldn't have helped him much for the performance we saw. But it definitely, like, it did show, like, on the one hand, it revealed some limitations. Like, we now know not to count on Dos Santos to effectively cut off the cage. He is going to follow an opponent around. He is going to fuck up his own footing in the process of following them around and make himself vulnerable, which is one way to compromise an otherwise incredible chin. But on the other hand, he also looked bad. Like, he looked slow and fatigued almost from the very beginning of the fight. Honestly, he looked jet-lagged to me. So I have to wonder how much of a factor that played as well. Because at the very least, this was close and close at various points. At some moments, very competitive, and other times that Dos Santos has found himself in fights of that kind, his sheer relentlessness has been a huge factor. Now, granted, Lyman Good was not cutting angles and moving around and denying the exchanges, so that had something to do with it. But I really expected him to be able to build and turn it on more. He looked out of energy by the end of this fight.
Yeah, and the fact that he just got hurt real bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to help, right?
Yeah, and he's always been one of the most durable guys we've seen at welterweight. I mean, the first shot was perfect, but the first shot was not uncharacteristic because it was a perfect shot from the leech.
Yeah.
And then it looked like Dos Santos recovered really quickly. The one which put him down at the end,
uppercut to the temple.
Yeah, it did look a little strange to me. I was like, just having seen how like the shots that he took from Lyman Good en route to winning that fight.
I think it was just the
look
placement.
A little out of sorts.
I think it was just the placement, honestly, of that. It hit him on the temple, and then it looked like he was still largely cognizant, but could not find his balance. His equilibrium was gone. But damn, the leech looked good. And do you think, last word on this, but do you think, like, is there a hope for the leech to become like a ranked fighter at welterweight if he's capable of putting on performances like this?
I want to say yes, and I think it's going to be dependent on what your definition of ranked is, and the ultimate question for this kind of thing is, does he get to fight Neil Magny? Which is pretty much the question you've got to ask.
That's the way in
that situation.
That's the gate. Neil Magny is the key. Yeah, I mean, let's take a quick look at who's at welterweight, like at the bottom half of the top 15. Magny is currently number 15, so it might not even get you ranked at this point, a win over him. Otherwise, we've got Vicente Luque, we've got an old Robbie Lawler, we've got Anthony Pettis is in the rankings for some reason. Oh, I guess Stephen Thompson, that makes sense. Ben Askren, Damian Maia, Stephen Thompson, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Darren Till. I don't know why the hell he's still ranked now that he's moving up to middleweight. These rankings are dog shit. Are there names in there that, like, you can see the leech at large, against most of them, an athletic deficit, is fighting smart enough to get wins?
I got to be honest, there aren't many.
Yeah. There's
Anthony Pettis, maybe. I mean, Robbie Lawler has not looked very good. I mean, it seems like it would be
he'd have to catch them at the right time.
Yeah.
But possibly the pawns.
Yeah, I mean, if Robbie Lawler came out fighting slow, and then the leech just kicked him in the leg a few times and kind of crippled him.
Yeah.
He does leg kick really hard.
He does.
But no, I wouldn't favor him against any of those guys. I mean, I think, like, Vicente Luque is an incredibly tough matchup.
Yeah.
Maia, he might be able to. Again, it's kind of dependent on Maia falling off physically. Nate Diaz.
Yeah, definitely that one.
I think he could beat Nate Diaz.
Definitely that one.
I'm not convinced by Nate Diaz at welterweight.
I'll be honest though, I wouldn't be, like, I didn't expect him to beat Dos Santos. I wouldn't be shocked if he could, with a performance like this, beat someone like Luque. If he can keep the right distance. You know, it's Luque's got better pressuring footwork, but he also hasn't faced a lot of, like, really mobile outfighters who try to stay away from him and counter him on the way in. So
yeah, it's fair enough.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Mike Perry had some success with counters, so if he can do it, then the leech probably can.
I mean, he has freakish durability, which the leech doesn't have.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing, is that we were expecting, like, the leech. I mean, it was a positive. He didn't get horribly dropped in round one.
Yeah, he hardly got hit. I mean, he didn't get hit on the chin very much in this fight. It was a couple of clean shots, but pretty defensively responsible, pretty safe.
But yeah, Luque is a ferocious puncher.
Yeah, it has to be said.
Probably with the exception of Woodley, probably the biggest puncher at welterweight at the moment.
Yeah, you're probably right. All right, well, I'm just going to keep hoping that I get surprised by the leech again. I enjoyed being wrong in that case so much. I want to relive that moment. But until then, that's it for our show. It's a long one this week, folks. Hopefully you had the patience to sit through it, but that's some 40 minutes we spent on the main event of UFC 242, I think was worth it. Very much looking forward to that fight. I cannot wait to see how Poirier Nurmagomedov shakes out. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. Just before we go, Phil, you got a toe-to-toe preview coming out this week?
I do. I think we've got two, so we will be putting out Nurmagomedov Poirier and Barboza Felder.
Sweet. I will be writing something on this main event. I don't know what it is yet, but immediately after this recording session, I'm going to be spending some time brainstorming. So you can find that in addition to Phil's previews with David Castillo on bloodyelbow.com. You can find both of us on Twitter as well if you would like to scream at us for our bad fight opinions. If you would like to passive-aggressively send me oh no, I don't want to say that. There's I was going to say passive-aggressively send me what you think are sexy pictures of Valentina Shevchenko. But already in the YouTube comments of our episodes, people are starting to twist the narrative into, I hate Shevchenko because I'm in love with her. And I do not want to lend any fuel to that fire. It's not true. I shouldn't have even mentioned it on the show. But you can find us on Twitter. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. And you can find me at Boxing Bush, B-U-S-C-H. Check out our Patreon, too. I may get a Vasilomachenko commentary vid up on there this week. It's either going to be, I'm going to be shooting for either that or the second Pernell Whitaker commentary in memoriam that I promised and didn't get to. I want to do commentary of his fight with one of my other faves, Azuma Nelson. So check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. It's $3 a month to get access to those and all of our other bonus episodes. And until next week, thank you all again so much for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
I am totally going to write that fanfic now of the mad, the kind of secretly angry analyst who gets, like, I don't know, maybe like trapped on a desert island with the sexy Peruvian MMA fighter. And at the beginning, sparks fly. She's seen his critical articles in which he talks shit about how little she does in fights. Soon, her survival skills start to melt his heart.
I'm becoming Frollo.
And he has to admit that she's the sexiest lady he's ever seen. And it all climaxes with a awesome scene where she teaches him how to do Peruvian dancing.
No. She's not teaching me.
Sorry, Kyrgyzstani dancing.
Yeah, I'm not going to be doing the Lesginka with Valentina Shevchenko anytime soon. I like to think I'm more of a Frollo.
You will be in my fiction, in my thinly veiled fictional version of you, Connor.
I think you should make me more of a Frollo figure, you know? It's not my fault. If in God's plan, he made the devil so much stronger than a man... I can't have her, and so I must destroy her.